Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me today, we have Wheeler.
Ahoy.
And we are here with part 3 of our Kamigawa set review. Quick reminder, though, that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Today, we are going to be covering green, gold, and land cards. And just a very small thing to address. There had been some confusion as to the particular order that we're doing stuff. If we have to do 3 episodes, we will divide the cards up in a way that makes sense to do 3 roughly even length episodes, which is why we did artifacts. This is not the first time we've done this. It probably won't be the last. So if your favorite color is missing, wait for part 3 and then we'll get there. Wheeler, start us off. What are we looking at today?
Well, it's not exactly, winning any awards, but it's efficient. It's Commune with Spirits, 1 green for a sorcery. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an enchantment or land from them and put it into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom in a random order. And this is the first time we've actually gotten this effect that's good. This is like a nod to Commune with Nature, which looked at it looked at 5 cards, but it only picked a creature. And we've received a couple of other ones, like 2 mana ones. You get the picture. But this one gives you, you're always going to hit, in a deck that's looking to include this card. So if you're looking to just have something in like an Enchantress deck, or at least an enchantment heavy kind of combo deck, like maybe even a land enchantment deck or Sanctum Stompy, then 1 mana to be able to hit your land drop or find a creature or find something to get yourself going is pretty clean. It kind of plays this like abundant harvest role without, having to worry about, oh, I hit a Llanowar elf.
It's okay. So I look at these cards and I feel like they're do nothing. Is this green's example of like Ponder or Preordain or something like that? Because I've routinely just never wanted to play any of these commune effects. I mean, big old shrug emoji energy.
We're not quite at Ponder and Preordain levels, but as cards become more efficient and as effects become more flexible and powerful, as a whole, the format is, and honestly, if you aren't already doing it, should look towards more smoothing out your draw, this can be anything from like playing Mishra's Bauble or Urza's Bauble in decks that, have like Luris or Monastery Mentor, playing cards like this in Abundant Harvest, as I mentioned before, playing Faithless Looting in basically every red deck, because there is so much more to these cards nowadays than just being a cheap kind of replacement effect. And yeah, I think that, your cards are really good. Even your cheapest of cheap spells will have some kind of flexibility. And so making sure you hit your land drops or can find that flexible answer is pretty important, no matter the archetype, frankly, except for like a hyper-linear deck.
Sure. Next up, we have Generous Visitor. This is a 1 mana 1/1 spirit for a single green pip. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. I like this a lot. I wouldn't play this in Enchantress because that deck doesn't need enchantment creatures, but we've been talking a lot about Sanctum Stompy. I think that deck is getting pretty real. And the reason I like this card as opposed to one that only grew itself is the flexibility of where you put the +1/+1 counter. I don't think I'd play it if it didn't have the word target on it. But if you are playing an aggressive creature deck that wants an early threat that's going to make your board bigger and more threatening, this is an easy include in that fairly niche archetype.
It's 1 mana. It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
The fact that you can play it, and like even if you draw it late, like it is just a 1 mana 1/1, but if you draw it late, it's cheap enough that you can like double spell with it and get something immediately, or just even Green Sun for it, and it's not wasting your entire turn. That's kind of huge. Speaking of huge, though, Jugan Defends the Temple. This is a saga, 2 and a green. Chapter 1, you create a 1/1 green human monk token that can tap to add a green mana. Chapter 2, you put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And Chapter 3, you exile it, return to the battlefield transformed. The flip side, Remnant of the Rising Star, is a 2/2 enchantment creature, and it's a dragon spirit. It's got flying and says, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X counters on that creature. And then as long as you control 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of the Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample. we talked about it a little bit last time, where like if a card has enough words on it, and if it's a mythic rare, it will probably do the damn thing when it shows up, Like it's sagas in general are kind of hard to evaluate for our format because, History of Benalia is a lot better when you play one and then you play another, and all of a sudden you're dead to a bunch of knights. Even then, like you have a couple of them shining through that aren't just the 1-mana ones. And so like the fact that this can make a body, can buff a bunch of things, and then on the flip side, not only does it give something green doesn't have a lot of, a flyer, but a flyer that turns every other creature into Wildborn Preserver, the 2-drop from Throne of Eldraine, which, it's from Throne of Eldraine, so it should give you a guess as to how good that card is. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm looking forward to giving this one a go. And honestly, I would have played this card in the last 3 Canlander events I played in if I owned a copy.
Interesting. I agree with you on it's hard to evaluate, but I'm a little lower on it just because I worry that the first 2 modes are slow. I think this card is nuts early, but I worry about the drop off the later the turns go.
We've talked about the speed of Canlander a lot.
Yeah.
And it's starting to turn, I think, and maybe this is too broad.
Is it getting slow again? Hold on.
No, it's just like it feels, because everything is so powerful and punchy. It's like a boxing match where we just throw haymakers at each other, for the first couple of turns. And then we're all worn out, sluggish, possibly concussed.
Out of shape.
But we still have to play a fight. Like we still have to, finish it.
Oh no, I've seen those fights. Oh God.
Oh, I've been in those fights. Like you need that longevity, right? You need that stamina. And I think cards like this can provide that, where, up front, they might muck around a bit. They're not the best, but they will cause more problems down the line. And they build to the board, advance the board, and then,
Like a green-red aggressive deck playing this on turn 2, I'm just like, oh God, help me.
Oh my God. Yeah, Llanowar Elf into this, and then you untap with like Rish card creatures. It's wild.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we have the Kami of Transience. This is a 2-mana 2/2 spirit for 1 and a green. The spirit has trample, and whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a +1/+1 counter on the Kami. At the beginning of each end step, if an enchantment was put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn, you may return Kami from the graveyard to your hand. I just seem to be getting all of the aggressive creatures for Sanctum Stompy.
Mm-hmm.
This is neat. It has a little bit of flexibility, and there's probably some kind of cute things you could do with the last line of text. I'm trying to say not just Sanctum Stompy again, just because that last ability is kind of neat. And I'm wondering if there's maybe a world where you're putting this in a black deck with a bunch of like animate dead effects and using this as a sack outlet for recurring nightmare value. I don't know if that's real or not. That might be a little too cute. You're probably only supposed to play this in Sanctum Stompy and have it be a recurring threat, but my brain wants to do something a little cuter.
I think your issue with that is that you're living a year ahead of everyone else right now. You're next leveling yourself in a way that, like, there was a point in time where a colored artifact creature was mind-blowing, and now it's just an everyday thing. And you have decks that just generate so many artifacts without being an artifact deck. I imagine we'll get to a point with enchantment creatures and even utility enchantments. Yeah, you could do that. Like you could have some kind of deck where you're not an enchantment deck per se, but you have a density of enchantments to maybe take advantage of.
That it's just there anyways? Yeah, I guess I'm supposed to evaluate the card for the current situation, not a magical future situation, but yeah.
Right, but I think you're in, like, you're looking towards towards a bright future.
Well, I think it's the same thing as when we start to see the emergence of a tribe, right? Where we speculated, it's like, is Merfolk there yet? Is Merfolk there yet? Merfolk is there. Is vampires there yet? Right? And I'm like, hey, what else can we do with this sort of, because Sanctum Stompy is new. It's 3-ish years, but in the history of the format, it's a newer archetype. And I'm like, okay, been there, done that. What comes after that?
Yeah. And new life is, breathed into these archetypes all the time, not just from the new cards, but also like people rediscovering old cards. And I think about this with enchantments kind of in the lens of, in modern, there was a card, Arkham's Astrolabe, right? That got banned. It was brutal. Snow, mana, rock, fixed your mana, drew a card.
Yeah.
And then after that got banned, you had these 4-color like green decks effectively that played Yorion, so it bounced a bunch of stuff. But they played Abundant Growth.
Oh yeah.
Avacyn Restored enchantment. It cantrips on draw.
It's one of my classics from Enchantress, right?
Exactly. And so, like, maybe they would have just said, oh, this is an ETB and it fixes my mana in a 4-color deck. But definitely the insight of like, oh, wow, making perfect mana so easy and cantripping for such a low cost is a pretty busted thing to do in the game. Maybe we could just do it with other cards. And so, I think that's the thing with Highlander too. I've been looking at Abundant Harvest in, outside of Enchantress decks too, because it's just so free. It's a free roll and it can be so helpful. So yeah, hey, maybe you need that little introspection. Here's a card without any need for introspection because it's just kind of an idiot, but it's my idiot. It's Kodama of the West Tree. 2 and a green for a legendary spirit. It's a 3/3. It has reach. It says modified creatures you control have trample. Again, modifications are equipment, auras you control, and any kind of counters. And it says whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land and put it into the battlefield tapped. Well, I like this card. If you're playing a counters deck, if you're playing honestly like just like green white like beatdown, maybe black green too, like there's so many incidental counters even if you're not trying. Really, or throwing a Rancor on something, putting a Skull Clamp on something. And in addition to giving them trample, it just gets out of hand. And then I guess the floor is that it's easy to cast and trades with Vendilion Clique. It's kind of just solid.
All right, next up, Kura, the Boundless Sky. This is a 5-mana 4/4 legendary dragon spirit. It has flying and death touch, and when it dies, choose 1. Search your library for up to 3 land cards. Reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle. I really want to stress the fact that it says 3 land cards, not basic land cards, any lands. And then the other mode is create an XX spirit creature token, where X is the number of lands that you control. This is neat. Now, lands decks have had the ability to tutor for numerous lands for quite some time. So this is not necessarily something new and something that all the lands decks are playing, but an archetype that has emerged from the lands deck instead of the all-in control lands archetype or combo lands archetype, which I have traditionally played. There's now just a really good mid-range deck that plays acceleration and creatures that are trying to kill you and could oops into landlocking you, or maybe oops into Thespian Sage Dark Depths.
Yeah,
and
there is.
I kind of like Kura a lot right there, because you can be applying pressure. Your opponent can be really hard trying to extend to kill you or waiting to wrath or something like that. And suddenly Kura makes that really difficult, because like 4/4 toughness really gums up a lot of the flyers that blue has access to. Your cliques, gums up the white flyers, the idiot birds and stuff like that. It kills Resto Angel. Like, this is a pretty big board, and they're going to hesitate to kill it if you're in the right shell, because they might just be putting you in a position to either strip lock them out or, get the giant flying spaghetti monster friend.
Card's great. Look forward to Eldritch Evolutioning into it. Shigeki Jukai Visionary. Legendary enchantment creature snake druid.
Nailed it.
It's a 1/3. It has 1 and a green. You tap Shigeki, return it to your hand, and then you reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. You can put a land from among them into play tapped, and the rest go to your graveyard. And then it has channel for XX green. You discard Shigeki and return X target non-land cards from your graveyard, non-legendary, from your graveyard to your hand. I imagine returning lands is going to be pretty important. What with the fact that this is a card that self-mills, ramps, is selection, and then it's like the first of these effects where, the big return X cards that will then just put itself into the graveyard. We see a lot of these cards have remove it from the game added to it, so you can't loop with it. That's not the case with Shigeki. And also you can do this as an instant. So I'm actually pretty high on this card. I think that mean, it's a deck we haven't talked about for a bit, but I think, other than lands decks being able to take advantage of it, maybe even lands combo, I kind of like this in Curb Your Enthusiasm, like the blue-green
Oh my
ramp into
god,
Time
just as a
Warp
way to
deck.
keep getting time walks back?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it ramps you, it fuels your like other Eternal Witness, gives you stuff for Mystic Sanctuary targets, and it's just a 1/3, which isn't the worst. Like if you play this out early, it eats a Jackal Pup, blocks a Ragavan,
I actually love that it's a 1/3. I like it better
Yeah.
than being a 2/2 because this goes in the deck that wants time.
Yeah, all you care about is giving yourself enough time to then be the only player taking game actions. And so I think it does a pretty good job of that. It's a little slow if you're just playing to play it out and then activate it and then play it out again. But I think that's okay. It's kind of got this like thawing glaciers feel to it, except, well, it's playable. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of Shigeki.
All right, next up we have the Spring Leaf Avenger. Is this the first ever green ninja?
Well, I guess Kappa Tech Record comes before alphabetically. But yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think so, yeah.
This is a 5-mana 6/5 insect ninja for 3 blue. It has ninjutsu for 3 and a green. And whenever Springleaf Avenger deals combat damage to a player, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, ahead of the show, Wheeler said there's only one card that I call dibs on, and it's the ninja. So you know what? Why don't I hand this off and let's see what you have to say.
Great. Not to spoil a question that's going to pop up later in the show, but there's a lot of talking about this card to be had. I think this is the best card in the set.
What?
Yeah, hands down.
Really?
Well, maybe hands down strong, but it's pretty hands down. Yeah. So I'd played this card quite a bit. I've played it the past 3 weeks that I've played Green X lands mid-range decks. And out of those 3 weeks, I've dropped 1 match. And that's not really the driving force because, again, small sample size, yada, yada. But when I look at a card and I think, I wonder if this will just play out the way I want it to play out. And then you give it a shot and it does not only that, but even more. You're like, wow, I guess this card is pretty good. So with this card is basically, what if a lava axe, Serge? 6 damage is so much damage.
It is a 6/5.
Yep, it's a 6/5.
It sure is a 6/5.
And it's a 6/5 in the colors of Llanowar Elves and importantly in Birds of Paradise and Gilded Goose. Cheap creatures, some with evasion, that you can attack with. And then kablamo, here's a 6/5. Or you're just playing, value creatures. Attack with your Eternal Witness, your Reclamation Sage, your Knight of Autumn, your anything really. And then kablamo, here's a 6/5. And I get to return a land, a planeswalker, a strip mine, a creature, a Jite that got destroyed. I'm just pulling from real world, instances.
Yeah, I'm just pulling from last Monday. Yeah, okay.
And
okay.
then you are in green. And you know what? 5 isn't a huge amount unless we're talking about toughness. Because dropping this card for 5 mana out of a green deck is not the end of the world. And then you just kind of have this 6/5 that if it hits, you're likely winning the game. And not to mention 5 means that in the, a green X mid-range deck, being able to Eldritch Evolution into Springleaf Avenger is not the end of the world. I got to do that once. That felt kind of absurd. And it hits like a truck. It's difficult to deal with. It's relatively easy to meet both of the costs. Not to mention the ninjutsu, right? Can't be countered except for through stifles, but that's whatever. This card just kills people. It does so much. I don't think I'm going to play a green mid-range deck without this card ever again. Or green aggro, honestly. A red-green aggro list. I attack with Kurdape and friends, and they're like, oh, whew, no Hell Rider. Anyways, I'll make these blocks. You're like, okay, you're taking 6 and more, It's, yeah.
Well, maybe I'll also find a card. Tameo's Safekeeping. Now, this is another Wheeler card. Wheeler, go ahead.
Tameo's Safekeeping. It's 1 green, instant. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and you gain 2 life. I mean, you don't want to fall in love with this and give an impassioned speech about Tameo safekeeping?
Oh, it's the best card? No, I'm like, cool, I guess another card for Infect.
Yep. I mean, it is kind of, it's nice that it has both hexproof and indestructible, so it kind of gets around one of the bigger issues that you can run into, where like if I'm playing like blue-green Sorensen or Infect, and I'm sitting on like a blossoming defense, and then someone, shows up to the shop and it's their first match since 2015.
They still have Dismember.
Yeah.
You're like, no.
It's just like, oh, I mean, yeah, I guess I'll die here. Or, that there are cards like not Slagstorm proper, but Anger of the Gods or Subterranean Tremors that this card has the added insurance against. Wrath effects, as mentioned before. And the life gain is kind of relevant, especially for decks like blue-green, where you are going to be racing your opponent, right? You will, in a tempo deck where you are trading off card value and whatnot just to, get some tempo and agency. The tacked on free 2 life feels kind of unnecessary, but it's definitely welcome.
All right. Next up, Teachings of the Kirin. This is a 2-mana saga for 1 and a green. Chapter 1, mill 3 cards, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. Chapter 2, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that you control. And on the flip side, you have Kirin Touched Orochi. This is an enchantment creature snake monk. It's a 1/1, and whenever it attacks, choose one. Exile target creature from a graveyard. When you do, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. Or exile target non-creature card from a graveyard. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that you control. I like this a lot. I feel this is just another very efficient threat that green has to really tax your opponent's graveyard, which is so important. We talk a lot about how big of a resource the graveyard is for a lot of players. And you're like, oh no, I only have 1 scavenging ooze. Well, you kind of have a second one. Obviously, being restricted to attacks instead of activating reduces that, but you will get a lot of value out of this. I love that it comes down on turn 2. I love that it gives you a body on the first chapter. And I'll probably also play this in Sanctum Stompy because it's an enchantment on both sides, which is kind of great. But you could probably get away with playing this in a mid-rangier deck. It'll give you a lot of value.
Yeah, this card just seems super annoying, Like,
says the graveyard player.
Okay, wow. You combine the whole, like, I think we're undervaluing it of saga creatures, plus just it looks kind of innocuous.
I actually look at this. I find this one easier to evaluate compared to, what was it? Jugan Defends the Temple. Because at the very least, this is, for 2 mana, you get a 1/1 on the first side, and it's a 1/1 on the other side. The +1/+1 counter is a lot easier to place. I mean, again, how am I phrasing this? Jugan being a 3-drop, I think makes it harder because it competes with more slots.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
more, like, there's a higher expectation for power level of how much it's going to punch. At 2 mana, this is doing so much.
Yeah, agreed.
Which is why I find this a lot easier to evaluate than some of the more expensive sagas.
Well, how about something that will corrupt you back to, higher value payoffs, the full 9 yards? Weaver of Harmony. Now, we could just get the Sanctum Stompy thing out of the way, but it's a 2-mana 2/2 enchantment creature. It's a snake druid. It says other enchantment creatures you control get +1/+1. Cool. And has pay a green, tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control from an enchantment source. You may choose new copies for that card. Hey, Serge, if I play this in Sanctum Stompy, it makes my things bigger. And it's an enchantment.
Easy money.
You agree with me.
Yeah.
Great. Now, remember when I mentioned Retreat to Coral Helm? When we were talking about a card from the first episode with Tamashi Reality Architect?
Yeah. I mean, so I looked at Weaver of Harmony, and I thought to myself, there's got to be a combo somewhere.
Oh, yeah. There's probably even more than Retreat.
So for people who aren't familiar with Retreat, it is a 3-mana enchantment for 2 and a blue. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may choose one, tap or untap target creature, or scry one. So I can't help but notice this is giving me some of those Rings of Brighthearth value there for copying certain abilities.
Yeah, this is a dangerous ability to put on an extremely tutorable 2-drop and then make it so cheap. I mean, dangerous only goes so far in a world of enchantment creatures and whatnot, but Yeah, I think this kind of just double duty, and it's like, well, you might have spots where this is just killing you dead, and then if your opponent has to deal with it and they build a board to challenge it, then you just combo kill them. The end. That feels pretty good.
The floor for this is like, oh, I guess I get another Enchantress trigger if my board is dead and I'm not swinging.
Yeah, good floor.
Heck yeah. All right, let's move on to gold cards. First gold card we're going to talk about today is the Colossal Sky Turtle. This is a 7-mana 6/5 enchantment turtle for 4 green, green, blue. It has flying and ward 2, and not 1, but 2 channel abilities. The first channel ability, 2 and a green, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. 1 and a blue for the second ability, return target creature card to its owner's hand. This is one of the more flexible modular spells we've had in a while here. It's a regrow, it's a bounce, and it's also a win condition, because that's a big booty, especially if you're playing a way to maybe cheat it back. You know, we talked about how Enchantress has ways to bring enchantments back, which is also happens to be. I don't know what deck I'd play this in, though. Oh, you have... All right, Wheeler, where's its home?
Well, remember Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Oh, no.
That's a good place for it.
Yeah, all right.
It's, I mean, worth noting with Shigeki that we talked about, it does loop very well with Shigeki. And of course, both of them being green creatures and enchantments at that. So you can find them off similar tutors. I mean, it's weird to say it'll show up with, 2 colors that it's not. You can return this off of both Volrath Stronghold and Hall of Heliod's Generosity, the symbol of his church.
Yeah, white and black, yeah.
And that's kind of spicy, right? Like just being able to pop this back on top if you need to, and then be able to bounce a problem card or rebuy your ETB creature, or, flip it where if you need to return, say, like another tutor to your hand, you can always tutor up. Like, this is maybe a bit of a pipe dreamish scenario, but I've seen some of the disgusting things that Bant Control has done in our format recently. So, like, it's not that far-fetched to think of a world where you might cast, like, Eladamri's Call for Colossal Sky Turtle, and then you return Eladamri's Call, and then you cast Eladamri's Call.
I mean, that reminds me of old school Canlander, of, Worldly Tutor for E-Witness, returning your Worldly Tutor. You're like, oh, yeah, I got a free creature out of this. So I do have a question, though. What was that Jer White classic deck, that stupid enchantment that untaps all your mana end of turn?
Stupid enchantment. Oh, the Wilderness Reclamation.
Yeah. I can see Jeremy White just being an absolute nightmare, hiding behind Wilderness Reclamation and the Sky Turtle.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy does like turtling.
All right, I stand corrected. There's a lot of homes. There's a lot of homes for this turtle, but a lot of players are at home. They've made it like an adorable little terrarium, and large terrarium based on the size of this lad, and they're ready.
Also, just Reanimator. I mean, you don't have to get that fancy. It's big and more difficult to kill.
Yeah, and it's a clock.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of clocks, there's not much to say about this cute little guy. It's Enthusiastic Mechanaut, blue and a red for a 2/2 artifact creature. It's a Goblin Artificer. It has flying and says artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I mean, I love myself a good 2-mana 2/2 flyer. I like reducing the cost of my artifacts. Heck, Serge, I'll publicly say it. I even like goblins. This kind of has everything you could, well, not everything you could want from a card, but I think this is just good. It's fine.
I think it's more fine than good, because there's a bunch of different effects that do this.
Yeah.
There's Ethereum Sculptor for 1 and a blue.
Mm-hmm.
There's, what's the factory one? 3-mana creature?
Foundry Inspector.
And Foundry Inspector is probably my favorite. There's also an Eldrazi that's a blue and a red that makes colorless spells cheaper. That
Herald
works.
of Kozilek.
And I'm actually lowest on, I'd actually put Enthusiastic Mechanaut above the Eldrazi. But casting a blue and a red, like requiring 2 different colored mana pips to make your colorless spells cheaper, is some mega points against this, because typically if you want to make all your artifacts cheaper, you also hope that this gets discounted by the other redundant effects, and it's a helper, but it doesn't synergize on the other hand. You know what I mean?
See, I think Ethereum Sculptor is the worst card that people play like with some regularity.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, I've always hated that card. It's just like, it doesn't do anything except for when it is doing something,
Like, that sentence doesn't mean
well, sorry.
I know what you mean.
It's just like if it's not being broken,
Sure.
then it's underwhelming for your artifact deck,
Yeah.
honestly.
No, I
And
know what you
then
mean there.
if it's being underwhelming, its floor is I have the most vulnerable creature in the game pecking for 1 on the ground.
Mm.
Whereas this guy, I mean, everything holds a cranial plating well, but this card holds a cranial plating extremely well. Like 2 in the air ain't
Well,
bad.
that's fair. So you'd call this second place and you'd drop Ethereum Sculptor down to third place?
Honestly, I kind of like it better than Foundry Inspector too.
What? But Foundry Inspector casts on turn 1 off of Workshop and it makes your entire turn nuts.
Serge, it's 2020, dude. Like Moxes are
It's 2022,
points.
Wheeler.
I refuse to agree with that. It's 2020. Moxes are 3 points. You know, we have more artifact lands than God. And like, it's just, I mean, also for a more grounded version is that after building like an Is It Affinity deck recently, somebody picked it up and they're like, hey, just wanted to let you know I played this deck and I'm in love. I'll never change it.
All right.
And this is one of the cards that helps with that. Yeah.
Next up, we have the Gloom Shrieker. This is a 3-mana 2/1 enchantment cat beast for 1, a black and a green. It has Menace, and when Gloom Shrieker enters the battlefield, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If it would die, exile it instead. This is kind of cool. This is not quite Eternal Witness, so like, don't start flaming me in the comments. I realize it says target permanent, and you can't loop it the same way, but it's nice redundancy. It has a keyword, which Eternal Witness doesn't have. And it's an enchantment, which is starting to get increasingly relevant. Obviously, it's a little bit vulnerable for other things, but if you're, say, trying to make an Absan Sanctum Stompy deck and E-Witness didn't quite make the cut because it didn't synergize because it's not an enchantment, you have options now. And I think that's the only part that's really relevant here is you've got options.
Yeah, I don't hate this in like just kind of a Golgari mid-range-ish deck, you know, not quite, I mean, maybe even black mold, but it doesn't have to be as all in as like black-green turbo aggression. But I mean, if I have like an Elves of Deep Shadow and Llanowar Elf deck, and I'm going to play like Rotting Regisaur and Scavenging Ooze and Dothy Voidwalker or whatever, like I'll sleeve this card up. It'll do enough. And and Menace is huge.
I do like it more in a deck that's playing Rancor or Bone Splitter, right?
Yeah.
Like that, because like you said, that Menace.
Yeah, I want it in a deck that'll actively look to end the game.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Speaking of encouraging people to actively end the game, we have Hiratsugu Consumes All. This is a saga for 1 black and a red. Chapter 1 is destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less.
Love it.
Chapter 2 is exile all graveyards.
Love it.
In Chapter 3, you exile it and return it to the battlefield transformed as Vessel of the All-Consuming, aka me at Christmas dinner. It's an enchantment creature. It's an ogre shaman with trample. And it says, whenever Vessel of the All-Consuming deals damage, put a 1/1 counter on it. And whenever Vessel of the All-Consuming deals damage to a player, if it has dealt 10 or more damage to that player this turn, they lose the game. I don't know how relevant that last line of text on the flip side is, but I'm sure. I mean, as much as I'm going to be an old grumpy man about this card. Is that okay?
Oh, please.
Because I'm sure that I'm going to cast Berserk targeting this card and I'll get that last thing and they'll die. They'll lose the game at like 2 life or whatever. But like, I don't know what it is, Serge. I know that this card has been showing up in Legacy, Vintage, and Modern, and I guess Standard. I know that all these cards, all these parts are relevant. I don't think it's this like my lizard brain is screaming because this can muck eggs. I just look at this card. I know it's good, but I just look at him like, I'm building black-red midrange as we speak. Well, not as we speak. I stopped to, during recording, but I was doing it before we started. And I'm looking at this card and be like, I don't need to play it. Oh, oops, I don't know to copy. I mean, I know YJ has one and I could pick one up, blah, blah. I don't need it. I don't think I need it.
What don't you like about this?
I don't know. Like maybe it's the fact that it's going to muck. Like I'm not trying to look at the downsides as always being a downside, right? But it is worth mentioning that for our format, we don't like for a Rakdos deck or a Jund, like I'm thinking of all the color combinations that could play this, specifically Jund, Rakdos, and Grixis, is that we are building our decks in a way that we'll always want to utilize our graveyards.
Sure.
And we'll always play 1-drops. We get Deathrite Shamans and Ragavants and Moxen.
And our own Moxen,
yeah. And tokens even, right? Token creatures. And then we also need to use our graveyards. Every every color configuration of that will use your graveyard. You know, your Tarmogoyfs, your anything really. And like, I don't know if we need this. I think that's the thing.
You know where I want to play this?
Want it?
I want to play this in prison decks where you don't care about anything. You're just out there trying to hurt yourself and them slightly more. Yeah, I'll wipe out all the Moxen. Yeah, I'll exile all our graveyards. I'm a madman. I don't care anymore.
What a nasty little man.
Right? And then in the ashes of a world that's been burning, it flips over to the all-consuming, and it's the only thing that's left.
Yeah.
Right? Turn 4, Wrath. Turn 5, blow up all their Moxens. Turn 6, exile all the graveyards. Turn 7, all that remains is the vessel of the all-consuming to clean up.
Yeah, I mean,
that's probably not the best case for it. As you mentioned, this card's like doing rounds in a very different role, but it makes me happy. That's where I thought about it.
I mean, now that you say it, getting their Mana Dorks and Moxen off the board means that they are going to have a harder time paying for my Tabernacle.
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah. You know what? I'll be disgusting with this card. Maybe that's where I'll start.
I think of this as being reactive instead of proactive. I want to play this against elves. I want to play this against goblins. I'm not thinking of where am I slotting this into my strategy. I'm thinking of what is the meta game and how much value can I get out of the first 2 modes, leaving me with this very aggressive 3-drop to clean up after.
You're out for blood, dude.
All right, let's move on and talk about Hinata, the Dawn Crowned. This is a 4-mana 4/4 legendary Kirin Spirit for 1, a blue, a red, and a white. It has flying and trample. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. Spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. I like this card. I think it does a good job of ending the game. I think the value you get for the cost is up there. I'm trying to think of broken things that you can do with the spells. And what was that OG mechanic from like original Theros?
Oh, the one on like launch
Strive or whatever?
Yeah, Strive.
Yeah, I just like, I don't know, like if you're playing a muscle wizard style pump deck,
yeah,
you could get some value out of that. Also, like giving all of your creatures Ward 1 is kind of cool, and yourself Ward 1 is also kind of cool. I'd love it if this had haste, and probably the main reason you're not going to play it is much more proactive 4 drops and, you know, competing with every other god tier planeswalker ever printed. But you can make a pretty fun deck around this. I'll die to it.
4/4 tramples kind of brutal.
Yeah, 2 forms of evasion.
Yeah, and a 4/4 trample that when you untap with it, as long as you have ways to protect it or clear the path, it's scary. It ends the game quickly. And like, this actually happened last night. I was reminiscing about Lightning Angel, and I looked at this card and was just like, oh my God, like this just kills Lightning Angel.
Yeah.
And Resto
it being
Angel.
a 4/4 is huge. We talked about that earlier with Kura. It's 4/4 just is the lord of the skies in our format right now.
And even if it's just making my mana leak cost 1, that's pretty gross. Yeah.
Oh my God. You're right. It does work for counter spells because it targets something. It's not a permanent. Ooh.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, Wheeler.
Even stuff like, I mean, I guess it makes your gifts ungiven cheaper, which is kind of funny, but you know, it's just kind of gross. It's just kind of big and gross, but less big.
I was going to say, how are you going to segue from there? Like, speaking of big and gross. All right, let's go, Wheeler. Come on.
I was trying to dig for something. I don't really have good words just because this card's so cool and I don't want to disparage it in any way, shape, or form. But it's Ishin 2 Heavens as 1. Red, white, and a black for a 3/4. It's a legendary human samurai. And it says, if a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. That happens a lot. There are several things that can take advantage of this and actually just, you know, like you could do some big things with like a goblin rabble master.
Well, look at the colors you're in, right?
Yeah.
For attacking creature triggered abilities? Oofa.
Yeah. And 3 mana 3/4s. I mean, let's give a shout out to those because like I feel like this is like an underrated stat line that you see a lot on these triple pipped creatures, but like it's a lot. It's really annoying is what it is. They make combat so awkward.
You know who doesn't play well? This is poor Goblin Guide. Don't play Goblin Guide and Ishin together.
I wouldn't recommend that. Maybe switch the Goblin Guide for a Croxa.
There you go. Ooh.
A Robber of the Rich. Yeah.
Any of those. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, Lelia is pretty good.
Is there a deck that wants this, or are we just talking like theoretical magical Christmas land now?
I think Mardu humans or 4-color blood can take
Yeah.
advantage of this. Maybe even the like 4-color humans tribal deck, 4-color no blue. You get away with it.
Has anyone tried to make Winota happen in our format, or is that just not happening?
I've seen her pop up a couple of times. I
Okay.
think she's one of those cards where it's like, well, if I untap with her, I
Yeah.
win the game, probably. But she's no questing beast. And I think people are pretty married to their Hell Riders. It's hard to get people to try out new 4-drops, especially when you've just had the beep beep Jeep. Also very good with Hell Rider, I gotta mention, because this is if a creature attacking. So if there's individual Hell Rider triggers, they happen twice.
I mean, even Hero of Bladehold, man.
Yeah.
The OG.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Good card.
Next up, Jukai Naturalist. This is a 2-mana 2/2 enchantment creature human monk for a green and a white. It has lifelink, and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Now, I don't typically love these effects in Enchantress decks. There's been a couple of these. Theros blocks made auras cheaper, enchantment creatures cheaper. Realistically, what you want your enchantment effects to do is draw you cards and refill the gas. And a lot of you are going to say, but Serge, this card is popping off in all the other formats right now, and Enchantress is totally nuts. And you're right. And this one might be closer because it's also an enchantment and it has lifelink. So when I'm doing a gatherer search for building a deck for Sanctum Stompy or for Enchantress, this is not an effect that I'm super hungry for. I think this one, however, because it is an enchantment creature and has lifelink, changes the evaluation slightly. Did that make sense? I feel like I rambled, but hopefully I got the point across there.
No, I get what you're saying. It's like I think, I mean, you'll probably agree, Herald of the Pantheon might be the one card you've been asked about the most.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, but it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Herald of the Pantheon, if you're not familiar, is a 2-mana 2/2 Centaur Shaman for 1 and a green. Enchantment spells cost 1 less to cast, and every time you cast an enchantment, you gain 1 life.
And then, but that loses out on again, the ease of finding it with enchantment tutors, it being an enchantment itself, and then the lifelink. Lifelink is huge.
Yeah.
Like that could just make or break your red matchup sometimes. I feel bad though that you've gotten all these Sanctum Stompy cards.
Why? I love that archetype.
I mean, you like that archetype, but I mean, this is one of my other top cards in this set is Kaito Shizuki. 1 blue and a black, 3 loyalty. It's a planeswalker. Kaido. And at the beginning of your end step, if Kaido Shizuki entered the battlefield this turn, he phases out. Has a +1, draw a card, and then discard a card unless you attack this turn. -2, make a 1/1 blue ninja token with this creature can't be blocked. And -7, you get an emblem with whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a blue or black creature card and put it into play and shuffle your library afterward. This is really good. This is another card where, God, I wish I owned a copy before sleeving up a Sultai list a week ago. But the biggest mistake I think people are going to make with this card is playing it and immediately down-ticking it, which is good. I mean, maybe you want the ninja, maybe you like the idea of I get to start drawing cards. But again, in our format, if we're playing, you could be on a Grixis deck, a bug deck, even just blue-black, like having a Deathrite Shaman, a Mana Dork, a Dark Confidant, whatever, something already existing in play, a Baral, means that likely you can get a card immediately off this and not have to discard. And even if you don't have it, that's okay. We use our graveyards quite often. Looting is a very good ability no matter what. And being able to have this just kind of piece out and say nope, sorry, you're going to have to deal with it at a different time is so annoying, especially in blue-black.
Yeah.
Hits the table, you get some value, it throws up the peace sign, fades away, and then comes back and you're like, great, I'm a deck with counter spells, discard, and kill, creature kill.
Well, there's the Planeswalker test of does it protect itself? And you're like, this sure does.
Mm-hmm. In several ways. Yeah, I love this card. It's annoying as hell. And honestly, that emblem, the fact that you can, unless they have a direct way of dealing with it in your upkeep, you are going to basically start the next turn, you're going to end the turn after you play this with this card at 5 loyalty and up 2 cards, or having seen more cards. And that's kind of huge. That's huge.
Next up, we have the Oni Cult Anvil. This is a 2-mana artifact for a black and red. Whenever 1 or more artifacts you control leaves the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn, and then tap and sack an artifact, deal 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain 1 life. I really want to like this card. I really, really want to like this card. I want to put this in a prison deck. I want to play this with smokestacks. And my concern is that it doesn't quite do enough. But the fact that you create an artifact that replaces itself for the triggered ability and you can sack it to deal 1 each turn, I think makes it the perfect piece in a deck that wants to stall forever. Just forever. Because you can just, you have infinite chump blockers. You can chump and you can sack. You have a clock to kill your opponent with. And it's hard to deal with because like Wraths don't kill it. And sure, people have access to some incidental artifact hate, but it's pretty low priority, which means it's going to put in some work. I don't know. I like it.
No, I'm with you 100%. I can't believe the only limiter on this is, I guess, artifacts leaving the battlefield on your turn. There's not the words non-token are not on here.
Yeah, right?
Like that's a lot that it gains life. Yeah, this card's annoying as all hell. Like,
right? It's rare to say that like a perfect prison card has been printed, but like that's what this is to me. This is not a clock. This is not, the second coming of Cat Oven or anything like that. I don't think you want this in Aristocrats or anything like that either, because of the weird little loophole and it only being artifacts. But you put this in a Mardu prison deck, and this is so gonna kill somebody over 30 turns, right?
I don't hate it in even a deck that has, just artifacts for the sake of triple mocks spread, like the planeswalker kind of stacks-ish lists, or the planeswalker control lists, or Arista scraps.
But as you mentioned, like there's so many artifact lands now too that even in that planeswalker deck, instead of going brown based stacks list, you just have incidental artifacts that you can sack and start that engine of slowly ticking your opponent down and creating these tokens.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a bunch of limited matches I've lost to this, so I'm getting a little tilted. Let's move on to something more uplifting. Tomio completed Sage. It's a legendary planeswalker named Tomio that costs 2 green-blue and then hybrid Phyrexian green-blue, or as they call it, completed. What this means is that the hybrid Phyrexian green-blue there can be paid with green, blue, or 2 life. And if the life was paid, Tomio enters play with 2 fewer loyalty counters.
So neat thing about this card, this is the only card in the set that has a mechanic on it.
And notably, it says this planeswalker. So, there could be other planeswalkers that are completed. So you're either paying 4 mana for 3 loyalty or 5 mana for 5 loyalty. And then you got to pay some life. And then +1, tap up to 1 target artifact or creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. -X, exile target non-land permanent card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card. And then -7, you create Tomio's Notebook, a legendary colorless artifact token with spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and tap, draw a card. I mean, I'm just still upset, honestly. She was my favorite planeswalker. I'd look so fondly on the days of playing Tomio Moonsage in our format, and that card being like, honestly, the iconic Canlander card.
Yeah. Oh, what a miserable way. I honestly, dying to Tomio probably felt worse than dying to J-Salt, right?
Yeah, because it's just like, I get this emblem, so I'm going to ancestral recall myself a couple of times, and then eventually I'm just going to do it targeting you, like kill you or whatever. I mean, this card has a lot of abilities on it that are good. Like the +1 and -X are both quite good. The -7, you don't judge planeswalkers by that, but judging by how vulnerable the -7 is, I imagine they expect players to get to that pretty easily. And if you play this out for 5 mana and just lock down their threats, like, yeah, you could get to the ultimate with this. But as it stands, like, I guess I will give this card a shot. You know where I'm going to play this card?
Where?
in like the blue-green opposition deck.
Yeah. Operation
Yeah.
tap down all their stuff already. I'm surprised you're not putting it in curb because it's a deck that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, well, you can play it in curb, certainly. I guess like getting an Eternal Witness or a Wood Elves or,
Yeah.
you know, another Planeswalker. Like the fact that on 5 you could play this and then minus X and make yourself like an Oko or a Jace the Mind Sculptor and get to keep this is definitely satisfying and extremely gross. And I don't even think that's Magical Christmas Land. The biggest limiter is that this costs a lot. And on an empty board, it's not really doing anything. Like it can't tap down lands, which I know is a big ask, but that's a thing you want to think about when playing a card like this.
Yeah.
Like, what does it do on an empty board? Not much. This just means my control opponent might even just be like, yeah, you can resolve that.
Yeah,
Sure,
I don't
you can
know.
get a Wood Elves and a turn I'll Murderous Rider your Tamiyo or whatever, you know?
All right. And now it's time to talk about the lands. And I know during hype season, a lot of discourse around these. So let's start off with a particularly spicy one. Boseiju Who Endures. Legendary land, taps or green, channel ability, 1 and a green, discard Boseiju, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature that you control. So the significance of this is the cost to include is extremely low because it's a land. We've talked about how strong, the modal double-faced cards were already for adjust your land count and smoothing out early draws. And the other thing that's remarkable about this is channel gets around counter magic. It can only be stifled. So this is a very flexible way to deal with a lot of problematic stuff.
It's
now,
just free. I mean, quite
I don't want to
literally.
say free because, and I literally was about to start that, Wheeler. What is the cost to play these lands in Highlander? Because we have to remember Blue Moon. We have to remember that this is a format that has Price of Progress, Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon. What the hell's the blue part of Blood Moon again?
Back to basics.
Back to basics. Like, it's not free, but it might be heavily discounted, right? Like,
Serge,
yeah.
I'm not saying this in any way to disparage the comments you've just made, because the comments you made are valid. They are correct. And yeah, there is a genuine cost, even for an untapped land like this to show up. You have to be careful, right? From everything from those cards to like a green deck playing Arbor Elf and having this card. These will pop up. But I gotta tell you, buddy, it feels kind of in line with people saying like, well, that's not technically strictly better for, and then extremely niche scenario. And Blood Moons and whatnot aren't niche, but like the cost is so close to free. It's like petting zoo costs, my dude. It's like
By donation, right?
yeah, by donation. And buddy, I will donate. Don't get me wrong, I'll donate. But at the same time, like, I'll reach into my pocket, throw the change, or like pay for a group or whatever, and that's whatever. I'll forget that happened, you know?
Yeah. All right. So real talk. Has it never been a better time to play Price of Progress? With everybody rolling all these new lands that have come out for the past 4 years, is Red just super well positioned to capitalize, or are these new effects strong enough to offset that?
There's never been a bad time to play Price of Progress. There's never a bad time. There's never been a bad time to play Price, and there's never been a time where Red Deck Wins isn't in the top 3 decks of all time, like in the format. So I think these lands, actually where these lands are going to show up, I think is most relevant for check lands like Sun Petal Grove and Friends. And
replacing those slots. Right. Or having conflicts. Yeah.
Or something that popped up with, I noticed this with Yavi Maya, Cradle of Growth. So the forest version of Urborg is I found myself building decks where I'm like, oh, I'm Abzan, so I'm going to play Yavi Maya and I'll have Urborg in here. And like, well, I need Caracas and I need blank and blah, blah, blah. And then I got to a point where I'm like, oh, I'm drawing these hands and I just have all these monocolored lands that don't do any. And I'm like, this is kind of awkward.
It happened to be in 3-color lands decks as well, which is why lands decks end up with like 60 lands. As soon as all of your lands also become all of your spells, it suddenly becomes very difficult when you're piloting the deck to figure out, well, which do I actually get to play so I'm playing Magic, right? At some point, if everything is utility, I don't have anything that just does its job as a mana producer.
So I think in the case of 3 of these, I'm playing them in every single deck that has these colors that isn't, totally out there.
All
And
right.
Boseiju is one of those.
All right. Yeah.
To make this Boseiju focused. I will say this. People are hyping this up as the best one of the 5. That's not the case.
Oh.
And then also just my fun little ditty is that if somebody Boseiju's one of your cards, you get a land with a basic land type. So that means it could be a dual land, a triome, or a mystic sanctuary.
It's a basic land type. It's not even a basic land. Oh, nice catch, Wheeler.
Yeah.
Oh my
so
god.
thank you. I'm sorry that you had such grievances with my Blood Moon. Allow me to get a Mystic Sanctuary and put it on top, and then put my Ancestral Recall back. And then maybe Blood Moon wasn't exactly the biggest problem.
All right. After we're done covering the lands, we'll rank them, and then we'll. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. I love it. All right.
Next up is a Gonjo, Seat of the Empire. This is the white version of these. Legendary land, taps out a white. The channel is for 2 and a white. You discard a Gonjo to deal 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. And this ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. This is another one of the 3 that I really like. I think I'll play it in every white deck. It's so annoying. It is so annoying. It's just like white aggressive decks like D&T could get this down to 1 mana, not some amount of the time. And even if it isn't 1 mana, getting it down to 2 mana that's uncounterable is a real pisser. And this card's really good. It's really good.
All right, next up we have Otawara, the Soaring City. This is the blue one. So legendary land, tap for blue or 3 and a blue, discard it, return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Notably, it isn't just your opponent's stuff. You can also defensively protect your own stuff.
Yeah, what if you want to, like, this one loops.
Yeah, you can reset your planeswalkers. You can. Oh my god.
It's funny to me. It's so cliche, because it's not like Mystic Sanctuary, obviously above everything else. And this isn't the case for this. There are really good ones. But the fact that the blue one is also the easiest one to go infinite with, like in combos, or just, in like a lands combo deck, an eggs or artifact combo deck, like it's just kind of absurd. Yeah. The next one is Sekenzin, Crucible Defiance. This is the red version. Legendary land adds a red. Channel for 3 and a red. You discard it and make 2 1/1 colorless spirit tokens. They gain haste until end of turn, and it costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So in a red aggro or like red, green, red, white, especially, again, you'll have some legendary creatures to be able to reduce this, but I think this card's quite good. It's you have to think about Fire Blast. That's always a big thing, is that every non-mountain you add makes your Fire Blast, the chance for your Fire Blast to not have the sufficient mountains, a little awkward. But like uncounterable 2 things with haste and 2 creatures that get around poor Firewalker, right? Like you can play this, have to
get around counter magic.
Exactly. Gets around counter magic, around pro red, around casting red spells, instant speed, being able to pass with a bunch of mana, make some things and untap and, subvert any kind of damage expectations they have. I think this one's pretty good. Not for every deck, but if I'm looking to kill someone, pretty good.
And the final card in the cycle is Take Numa, Abandoned Mire. Channel 3 and a black, discard it. Mill 3, then return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. Cost 1 less for each legendary creature you control. Pretty classic regrow effect. The fact that it also hits planeswalkers makes it pretty spicy, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So, what's your ranking? What's your ranking from strongest to weakest here? I'm very curious.
Okay. My top to bottom.
Yeah.
Otawara is number 1.
Okay, that's the blue one.
That's the blue. Gonjo is number 2. That's the white one.
Interesting.
Boseiju is number 3, the green one. Takenuma is number 4, and then Sekenzin is number 5.
And I'm assuming Bant, so green, blue, white are the 3 that you will always play in every deck, irregardless of downside.
Yes.
Wait, I just said irregardless. Oh my god.
Okay,
editor,
this isn't
editor,
recorded.
can we scrub that, please?
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever like they're so good. They're always relevant no matter what your deck is trying to do, and basically no matter what your opponent's deck is trying to do. They are like relatively, Otawara does cost 4, but that effect is absurd. The other 2 are cheaper, meaning that like weaving it into your plays, especially if maybe you are holding back a land drop in order to keep it in your hand as an option, isn't as bad for you. And they're also the colors that tend to play well at instant speed, with these effects being the most relevant at instant speed. If you're at home and you're like, well, thank God, now I won't pick up a Takenuma or Sekenzen.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do that. Please buy these cards. They are very good. They go into more decks than you'd think. Again, Sekenzen and Takenuma are both other ones that do go infinite. You know, if you're doing land combo, gross stuff, making infinite 1/1s with haste, kill someone, or milling your deck and then finding the value creature like an Eternal Witness to return your kill card is killing them. The biggest thing I've seen is people saying, I'm not going to play Takenuma. I think that's likely the one that will be the most undervalued of the bunch. Because like every deck won't mind having the mill to then bring back a Snapcaster or whatever.
It's wild because so many people will play, black land that wanted a black return a creature, put it on top of your graveyard.
Volrath Stronghold.
Volrath Stronghold, right? And they won't even think twice about that. Like, oh, my deck needs some free recursion.
Yeah.
I think Takenuma has a much lower cost of inclusion than Volrath Stronghold.
Yes. And also, you know, Tainted Pact. I can't talk about these cards with Tainted Pact enough.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
And the last little thing I will say, and I think we could honestly do a whole episode about this, but I think people need to take another hard look at their mana bases and the lands they are choosing and which, you know, lands are best in 2-color strategies and 3-color strategies, because it's, I was definitely dropping the ball on that for myself for a while recently. And then kind of it all clicked and my mana bases have felt so good.
Oh, good.
As of late. Yeah. I'm a fast land convert.
All right, let's take us home with the final card, slightly out of order, but we wanted to group up that cycle together. Now we're going to talk about the Secluded Courtyard. When it enters the battlefield, choose a type, taps for colorless, or add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, or activate an ability of a creature or creature card of the chosen type. This is great. The fact that it doesn't come to play tapped is fantastic. There's been a couple of other effects like this, and if you're playing a tribal deck, play them all, right?
Yeah. It's just a nice quality of life upgrade from unclaimed territory, but you're probably playing both. You're definitely playing both.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think the 4 or 5 color tribal decks have always wanted more effects like this.
Yeah, they'll take as many as you're willing to give them.
All right, Wheeler, final thoughts on Kamigawa as a whole.
I mean, I'm always biased towards Kamigawa sets, but this is, I mean, frankly, I had all the reasons to hate this set, right? To them to do the thing that wasn't the thing I experienced, and they did not fail. Like the set feels so good to look at, to play with, to brew with, to, you know, it gives juice to decks. Again, it continues this trend of like, these cards are powerful, but you don't hate having to include them in all your decks, be them, you know, the lands or even like cards like Lion Sash or whatever. And they give so much life to fan favorite archetypes that just need a little bit of a boost. And in a way that is more broad than, say, the Innistrad sets did, right? It's not like, oh, Vampire Tribal, Spirit Tribal. Yeah, it's like, no, artifact decks, tempo decks.
Enchantment synergies.
Exactly. Counters, you know, and that's huge. I genuinely think this is one of the best design sets of all time.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Vehicles is maybe viable now. Oh my God, just reflecting on it all.
Ooh.
All right, friends, that is going to do it from our Kamigawa set review. What did you think? Let us know in the comments down below. And as always, if there's any cards you want to talk about, we're always happy to read things there. Reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Speaking of loading ready run, keep your eyes on the streaming schedule because we might have some cheeky Canadian Highlander paper magic coming on down the line for some live content there, as well as on the YouTube channel for the pods afterwards. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.